All right. Perfect. Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, a little bit loud. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It's great to see such a turnout to have a to join us on this panel to discuss an important topic, which is the situation of media in exile, with a focus also on the situation of Russian media in exile, the biggest group in this category. My name is Jakub Parusinski. I'm a director at The Fix, which is an organization that researches, writes about, and advises media across Europe. And yeah, so whether it's Afghanistan, Myanmar, Cuba, the entire Eastern Bloc for a while, the story of journalists who cover their country from abroad is sadly not a new one. However, what we have seen over the past 14 months, this is something of a scale, of a rapidity, and of an impact that is unprecedented. With literally hundreds of journalists from dozens of media needing to exit the country to continue existing, to survive. In order to maybe give us a sense of just the proportions of this challenge, I'd like to introduce the first speaker on this panel, Penelope Winterhager, the head of the JX Fund, an institution that was set up specifically to address this problem.
So thank you, Jakub. Do I have to press a button? No. Yeah, let me give you a quick overview of what we have been doing in the past, unfortunately, 12 months. We were put into life just because we noticed that there is always a gap. When people go into exile, they need to seamlessly continue to work, otherwise often their voices are being lost, like it happened in Afghanistan. And Reporters Without Borders and two German foundation wanted to avoid this happening again. So since March last year, we have been supporting 37 media outlets from Russia, also from other countries, but as we're talking about Russia here today. So as you see, this is an enormous amount. And for those outlets are working about 900 people, 900 journalists across 8 countries. So these media are registered in 8 countries, but the people working for the media are in over 25 countries. So this is something not like a normal media outlet, but you're always dealing with offices that are spread over various countries with the issues coming along that maybe our colleagues here on the panel can talk about later what that means for a medium. So at the beginning, when you go into exile, you first have enormous social problems. Unfortunately, these last till the date. Yes, you have visa, health insurance, housing, etc., etc. So we try to help with those, with a lot of other organizations that support in that field. And but there's still a migration wave continuing. So you don't go into one country, often you change countries, and this lasts till today because a political pressure starts in one country. So parallel to this, you try to rebuild your medium, and often one person arrives and builds an office, and then the rest of the media outlet arrives, and you start to think about, how do I rebuild my website? What channels do I start to rebuild? And just to give you an impression how amazing this group, what kind of work they did, alone the ones that we are dealing with, their websites are reaching now 16 million people every month. Their YouTube channels are followed by 6 million people. Their Telegram channels have 2 million readers. And there is more to say, but it is enormous, I think, what has been achieved in this first year, starting from scratch in exile, and let's see how we can build on that. So what we see right now is that there are 4 hubs developing. It's Riga, Tbilisi, Amsterdam, and Berlin, and a little bit Prague maybe, where there are the biggest communities. What we need is twofold. One is the local support within these hubs, and the other is what is building right now is kind of shared services. So for bookkeeping, accounting, all these things have to be built up as well. What is interesting maybe is that in this case, the editorial team has left the country, and the publishing team and all the people who do the administration, they have not left the country as quickly, so there is often a big gap. So the editor-in-chief is also doing the, organizing the money, the office, the cleaning, everything. So only by now we see a real media company is establishing with all the facilities that you need. So the challenges that we're facing right now is to, from this starting phase, to build a strategy. I mean, when you go into exile, you don't have a business plan, but you start that, only maybe 3-6 months in the course. Then we see it is great to work across countries, but there's also a big need to meet again and to, have a retreat, work on your strategy for the future. There is a big need for advocacy and conversation with big tech. So when you rebuild your outlet, you are being scored badly by Google. You may start on TikTok, which is, as you know, a Chinese platform, which might not be the best platform for this kind of content. So this is definitely what we also need, and where they need to join forces. And I think one of the biggest challenges also is to, and it would be interesting also what the colleagues say about this, to keep in touch with your audience, build your audience, and across countries, back in Russia where you may not be anymore, how do you, have your thumb on the pulse of your audience to still address them with the content? So this is just to give you a quick overview. I can talk another hour, but...
Yeah, and we'll continue to do so. Thank you very much, Penelope. And exactly, to dive in deeper into this, it's great that today we are joined by representatives of 2 Russian media in exile to give us a little bit of a better, more in-depth sense of what the daily situation looks like. And just to give you a sense of also how we're structuring this panel, I think first we'll try to dive in and just give people a sense of what is the reality, because it's not like running a normal media. And there is a lot of very unique challenges there, and then we can pivot towards, well, what do we do with this? How do we move forward? How do we kind of not fall into the trap that, or the many traps that exist for media in exile? So I'd like to introduce Jana Golovnych, head of SMM from Holod Media, as well as Kirill Artemenko, CEO of Bumaga. And Paper Kartuli, I guess 2 publications now. That's also an interesting aspect of the existence in exile. And maybe just to start, Jana, look, you're now having the quite challenging task of running social media for Holod. For somebody from a let's say, normal publication, the situation is relatively simple. You have your team in the country, you have your audience in the country, you have the channels to distribute the social media that are in one country. Now your audience is at least in 25 countries. The team is all over the place. How does that reality look like? What are the challenges of dealing with this?
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Jana. Again, I am head of social media and distribution at Holod. And today, here instead of me was supposed to talk our editor-in-chief and founder, Taisia Bekbulatova, but unfortunately she couldn't make it because of visa problems, which many Russians face now, even independent journalists. So I will be the one who tells you about it. The war started, and within 2 weeks, Putin signed the fakes law, which basically meant that Russian independent journalists couldn't work inside of Russia anymore. Also, he blocked independent media websites, he blocked social media platforms such as Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and it changed the reality really quick. So our main challenges were how to reach audience under such a censorship and how to organize our work with journalists being in 6 different countries or even more. I will start with the audience. Now our monthly website audience is 3 to 5 times bigger than it used to be before the war. Also, our social media platforms grew a lot. Our total count of followers used to be 47,000 before the war. Now it's 247,000. And in order to achieve that, we had to use as many different tools as possible. We had to diversify our content and our platforms. And our website was blocked after a month after the war started, and we had to encourage our users to use VPN. We had to create mirror websites, which also were blocked. So now we're using a Telegram bot created by Russian digital organization Roskomsvboda that helps Russian media with censorship. We also focused more on social media because it's easier to spread information there, it's easier to reach people there. We used as many different formats as possible, as many different platforms as possible. We created shareable pictures, shareable infographics, reels, videos, and so on. We focused more on Instagram because after the start of the war, a lot of Russians shared the news via stories, Instagram stories, and it was a good way to spread information, and it worked for us. Our Instagram grew from 18,000 before the war to 122,000 now, which is more than any Russian independent media percentage-wise. Other platforms also grew, Telegram from 6,000 to 26,000, Twitter from 6,000 to 26,000. We also have TikTok and WhatsApp and Facebook, and we also tried to use Viber because it's a good way to reach the audience that is outside of our bubble. But now we stopped doing that because we don't have enough resources. Also, in August 2022, we launched English version of our website, and we launched English Twitter. There we translate some of our most important articles into English. We do about 2 pieces per week. We also cannot do more right now because of the resources. We also try to collaborate with international media and with Russian media. Some international media translate our pieces. Among them is Decoder Media, Gazeta Wyborcza, and even some Italian media outlets. We collaborate with Russian independent media like Bumaga and so on, and we exchange posts on social media. Sometimes we write articles together. We also try to create content that is impossible to block, like newsletter or podcasts. In winter, we relaunched our newsletter, where we tell the news through shareable tweets. We also have a podcast where our podcast editor, together with Ukrainian journalists, tells about the news that happens around the war. As for the team, I would say the main problems are immigration and the legalization, because people had to live their lives very quick. Within a week, they had to pack everything. And now they have to build new lives, but they have these legal issues where European countries sometimes don't give them visa, like it happened with our editor-in-chief. Or in Georgia, most of our team lives in Georgia. There are problems too, because if you leave Georgia, there is a chance you won't come back because they don't let people, journalists and activists in without explaining the reason. That is a problem too. As for the fact that our team lives in 6 different countries now, it's not that big of a problem, and we adapt it quickly. We have Zoom calls, and we try to have offline meetups at least once a year. Last one we had in October. Also, we try to use our audience as reporters. We ask them to share their stories and experiences on our Instagram, and for Telegram we created a special bot where people can share their stories anonymously. So this way we can report from inside of Russia without actually being in Russia. And I would say that the biggest problem for all of the media now is money, because you cannot monetize your audience. There is no way you can do that, and we have to find new ways to deal with that.
Thank you so much, Jana. I'd like to sort of dive a little bit into 2 topics, maybe on media team management. I'd also love to get your views, Kirill. But just in terms of the reality of sort of, one story is to distribute the content, the other one is the preparation of the content itself. And while you might be using lots of tools, and it's impressive to see how many of them to counter sort of Russian censorship. How do you make sure, aside from getting content from people, that what your journalists are producing is still relevant to the audience that is inside of Russia?
We try to talk to our audience, of course, and I think our journalists are still kind of feel the Russia because they have the family in Russia, they have the friends in Russia, they always read the news from Russia. And we also ask our audience what is going on in their lives. We have like UGC content or social media where we ask them, how do you feel about that? What do you think about that? What is going on there? And they share their experience with us, and it helps a lot, I would say.
All right, perfect. This is a topic that I think we need to unpack a little bit more later in the discussion, specifically about how you avoid a media in exile from becoming an émigré media, which is quite a big problem. But before that, Kirill, can you share a little bit about the story of Bumaga and how you are managing? Specifically, I'd love to hear about the sort of the practical, the HR problems. How do you manage a team that is all over all of these countries? How do you keep them working together? And I also have a question about paper cartuli, but maybe let's split it into two parts.
Okay. First of all, before the war, we were commercially, before the full invasion started, we were commercially break-even and even profitable, and we never planned to leave Russia. So we thought of making something abroad, like an extra business, like a side activity that we can do. And we've been thinking of it through the pandemic times, but we were only chatting about that. So how nice it would be to open a company in Estonia, this electronic company that can provide some services to the IT companies all over Europe, and there will be new cash flow. And then 24th February happened, and it appeared that we can't open the company in Estonia anymore. And then we opened the company in Georgia because it was realistic at that moment. But the process that usually lasts like for 3 days. So we had 1.5 months to go through the compliance procedures, but it's like normal situation for now, for the Russian media in exiles now. And our team, so from the very beginning of the full invasion, full-scale invasion, we realized that sooner or later we will need to evacuate our team. So I hate the word relocation, to be honest. Relocation is something about the nice latte, coffee, and IT offices with a full HR package. So when you receive 10,000 green to have your own flat, something like that. But we had evacuation like all the media, like Holod, like everyone in our industry, in our sector. And it was the decision to leave Russia in 1 hour when there was a risk to be stuck inside country because of the closed borders, because there were some leaks about the discussion about the potential military drafting that started in September. And so now our team is split in 11 cities in 8 countries, and it's quite funny that we are local media in exile. So we are still local media, we are St. Petersburg dedicated, but we are local media in exile, and it's quite interesting challenge for the journalism itself to make local media from abroad, because you need a net of the local journalists who still on the ground, who are risky enough to work in Russia, who want to work in Russia, to keep on working in Russia, who work anonymously. We also are in process of building up of the net of so-called professional eyewitnesses, so the ordinary people who just make photos and like some UGC content that we use a lot spontaneously through this year, because we had a community of paying members. So we have like 1,500 paying members for our membership model. And we also have lots of people who donate us, who use our commercial VPN. It's part of our new business model we rebuilt now. And it helped to be close to the audience, because without that, you start to be separated from the real situation, and you start to discuss the things that are not about their problems inside country. So they are about the problems of people here in nice Italian landscapes, some problems with opening the bank accounts and other stuff that's totally out of mind of 98% of Russians now. You asked me about the management like challenges and problems, and of course we started a lot from the IT companies, because the remote way of managing the company is the reality for lots of IT companies all over the world, and I think there are lots of practices that we can learn from. And I was quite sure, even before the pandemic, even before the war, that it's very important for media to learn from the other industries, because we are quite self-focused all the time, and we are quite, how to say, sometimes we lose some new ideas and lose some new practices that are absolutely common for other industries. We learned a lot from our new colleague who was the e-commerce guy about promoting the e-products, because we are journalists, we do great journalism, but we don't know anything about the funnels and about the conversions. So we started from him, because he was from the company that sold cakes. And now we learn from the IT companies. We implemented some practices of remote work. We use like Slack and all the like Google Meets and all the practices for remote company when you work separately from your team. One guy from our team is in Chile, in Valparaiso, so he has some issues in coming closer to our team, but it works out, so it can work. And of course, the burnout of like the team is extremely important, because I think lots of the discussions were here about the news fatigue, especially the news fatigue of the audience, who is absolutely crushed after reading and consuming the content about the war. That is heartbreaking. And now it's a big trend in Russia that people started to avoid this content just because they can't feel it. And the same with the journalists. So journalists are burnout, and you need to provide them psychological support and some practices that can give them strength. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that. I want to come back to this point about how do you manage this, and how do you sort of continue to let's say, pierce through not just the censorship, but also people's exhaustion, interest through the bubbles that exist, because I think there is a historic responsibility here as well that is quite important to deal with. But before we go into that, I'd just like to do a short recap, and Penelope, tell me if I'm missing something, right? So if we look at kind of the challenges from a practical perspective here, we're talking about the audience is broken up into pieces, the team is broken up into pieces. You need to both issues that you have to manage. The financing model is kind of gone. You have tech challenges of countering censorship and also collecting data on what the audience is interested in. You all of a sudden have to deal with lots of donors and fundraising, which it has its share of complexity. Visas, legal. Am I missing something?
Psychological, you might add, no?
Yeah.
Trauma.
Yeah. So how do you sort of address those challenges? Like, how are you sort of thinking at JX Fund to solve this?
That's an easy question.
Yeah,
So what we try to do at JX Fund is we try to kind of monitor continuously what are the challenges, what are the most urgent challenges. So one urgent challenge will keep core funding of those outlets. It is impossible, as you said, to build a business that is self-sustaining, because you can't, even if you build enormous reach, you cannot monetize this reach yet, hopefully later. So I think what we still need is core funding. We still need to, I think you said that once too, it will probably be something like Noah's Ark. There will be only a limited number of outlets surviving in exile, and we need to make sure that we support, all of us, a broad array of voices, of topics, that not only 3 big outlets survive, but that also smaller outlets that talk about decolonialization, whatever, not only from the big cities, but also from the countryside, that we kind of help a broad array of outlets. So yes, we do need funding still. And the other part is to accompany the media with the challenges they face and say, for example, I think, you know, even a regular medium has at the moment still difficulties in transformation and business model. So it's something we need really good people in supporting that to rebuild those businesses and think about, you know, how can you start new revenue streams apart from donations. And some of them already were quite successful. And apart from that, I think we have to work on in the hubs, kind of shared service structures, and maybe even some of the media need to work closer together, because what we see right now, there are lots of little outlets starting, and sometimes you think, maybe it doesn't have to be a separate outlet, but it could be, you know, a separate topical thread of an existing outlet. So I think we can kind of moderate that, because we see a lot across the hubs as well. So this is what's on our agenda at the moment, yeah.
So I'd love to unpick this point that you mentioned about a shared service center. So we're talking about dozens, so, you know, 30, 40, 50 media in exile. Probably if you made the full list, it's closer even to 100, but, you know, there is some element of, let's put it nicely, rationalization or focusing on trying to keep media alive that, you know, are sort of strategically important to the ecosystem. What is a shared service center? Just to give people a sense of what that is. Yeah. So
I think there are certain services like legal, like bookkeeping, like IT solutions that not every outlet has to be built for themselves. You know, and this is something that you could provide. There are, you know, little solutions like that already in Amsterdam put up, but I think this is something you can scale, especially the legal, for example, is something that you don't need in every hub, but that can work across hubs. So we built, or we supported that, something like that is built in Berlin. There's also an initiative, for example, to secure archives of media in exile because they were threatened. So these are all services that can, you know, be centralized, and because you cannot replicate that over these many outlets.
Yeah, thank you. That's a perfect example. I mean, I always think about it this way, that, you know, if you want to open up a small business, you can hire an accounting service or a legal service provider. You don't need to build all of that in-house, especially if your team is like 5, 10, 15 people. Maybe you cannot create a whole corporate structure of having a legal...
Yeah, you have a different security level here, so it's not hiring anybody, giving their, you know, your whole team informations, and so this is a bit more difficult, but...
Yes, exactly. Well, so it's not that easy. So, you know, Kirill, maybe you can share a little bit, because, you know, we've had this discussion before, like, where does this work, where does this not work? Like, what are the limitations of this kind of shared service approach?
It's quite a complicated topic, to be honest. So, but, so my personal view, and I'm not insisting that it's a truth, but I think that some outsourcing of for example, IT services works partly. I think every media that has, I don't know, own technologies, own website needs to have at least one part-time but focused on this media specialist. Because if it is like outsourcing that bring the media managers and media makers need to stay in the queue, so there will be a mess. So yeah. like it's happening all the time with the outsourcing of any complicated services. But if there are some legal procedures that are difficult to understand for the media people, that are complicated and that are very specific for every country, especially in Europe, so it can be outsourced and it can be replicated very quickly, and it can be possible, and it can be very useful, because especially in Europe, especially in Germany, especially in Netherlands, the specialists are extremely expensive, and it's out of budget of any media that is doing like any activities. If we speak about the data analysis, I think it can be outsourced. For example, we personally, so we have our own sociological services. So we earned money with sociological research before the full-scale invasion and before pandemic, and it was a part of our business model. And now we do some data analysis of the audience for the colleagues, for the media, with the NDA, of course. But some colleagues came to us because they don't want to make this in-house, but they have it in their budget, for example, from donors, and they can make research to find out what is working for their audiences, what is not working. And of course, we're not the only team that can do it. So they can be outsourced and can be analyzed by like the professionals. Because it's like the limited part of work. If the work is not limited but ongoing, I guess the outsourcing would be problematic.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, pivoting to the really challenging questions, because so far these have been easy. So look, there's a really big issue here, which is, on the one hand, I think a question of responsibility of media to continue to inform and share information within Russia. There is an issue of reader fatigue, which needs to be managed. But still, it's important that people in Russia understand what is happening in Ukraine, what is happening around the world. And on the one side, on the other side, I would say breaking down the barriers of the bubble that is partially in Russia, the people who are, let's say, part of liberal opposition circles, many of whom are now together with the media in Georgia, in Latvia, in Germany, in Netherlands. How do you do that? How can that be done, let's say, better? Penelope, you have some idea. This is open up to everyone. I don't think anyone has perfect solutions, but I think this is a fight that cannot be given up, right?
Well, I mean, what I would like to call for, and what we see, it's still tiny, but I think there's a huge potential, is also for the kind of media within France, Germany, whatever, to collaborate with the outlets, with the exiled outlets. We see a few cases where this has happened, and with the result of great stories, especially for the investigative journalism, I think. And I can, just offer to anybody, we can make contact. I think there's a lot of potential there also to scale the knowledge of those outlets beyond this bubble. And so this is one of the things I think that should happen to crash this bubble.
Kirill, Anna, any additional ideas?
So I think that the reporting, I can speak only about our experience. It was quite easy for us to keep on doing what we did because we always was the media that was based on fact journalism, not on opinion journalism. And I think those who are focusing on opinions and some discussions and evaluations, and this is a specific genre, and it's very problematic and dangerous sometimes because people who left country and people who stayed in country feel uncomfortable about each other. And I'm afraid that this gap will be growing up years after years. And it's sad to see this conflict between Russians who are all against war. And if you speak about the audience who maybe is not for war, but about the audience who just don't care, I think it's important for journalists to focus on their personal interests. Because of course, it's important to cover so for us also it was quite easy because we are local media and we, from the very first day, we were focused on the consequences of Russian invasion in Ukraine for the local environment, for the city. So it was the question for us to, we are not the frontline media. So it's just not our focus. And when you're focused on the consequences of war, you speak about the real interest of the people on the ground. So you speak about the inflation, you speak about the deficit of the goods, you speak about the limited access to the medicine, and you bring into the minds of people who just don't want to notice the war, the idea is that something wrong is going on. even if you are out of politics, even you don't care about politics, even if you're really out of politics. So, and I think it's the method, so to focus on the personal interests of the people inside country.
Okay, yeah, make it sort of tangible in ways
Yep.
that are, I mean, you both mentioned, you know, user-generated content as one of the ways to continue to source information about what is happening within the country, not necessarily having a large or a continuous presence there. Maybe sort of, you know, Jana, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also kind of 30% across both countries. By the way, this did not affect Belarus as much. Belarus, you know, for lack of positive or negative, continues to be stable. Yeah.
Like you.
It's an inside joke for people who know
always.
Yes, it was stable, but both Russian outlets and Ukrainian outlets dropped, you know, quite significantly since then. So the first question is, you know, how are you thinking about that? Because sometimes just force feeding people the content it doesn't work. How do you kind of like try to keep people engaged? That's the first part. I'll get to the second part later.
Yeah, we definitely see that people got used to the wars. They don't like reading about the war that much. So we try to add some more news about other topics that were like that people interested before the war, like female rights or like poor people in Russia and so on. So yeah, that's what we do. We also try to find new focus and to tell the stories that were not told yet. There are some. And we add even some, you know, entertainment stuff like tests and games even, because there is no way we can feed people this horrible information every day without them being tired of that. So yeah.
Okay. I guess the second thing that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is sort of how the situation will evolve now. I mean, we've had a lot of discussions about, you know, censorship of YouTube, right? Like everyone thinks that is coming. I don't know what are your thoughts? So how do you see sort of the situation evolving? That I guess that's point one of the question. Point two. To what extent are these solutions that have technological problems that have technological solutions to them? I mean, there have been some efforts. Several media got together. They put together an app that's called Samizdat, so the self-publishing that's supposed to be able to circumvent some censorship. There have been other interesting efforts out there to sort of use tech as a solution. I'd love to get all three of your thoughts on sort of like how this side of the situation will evolve.
Okay, I can start. About the YouTube, so for sure it will be blocked. So and I think that any risk analysis about like Russian environment should be done. Like, of course, it will be done. So anything bad that can happen will happen. So that's it. Speaking about the technologies, you know, all the independent media have seen the growth of the social channels after the blocking of the websites. But the problem is that the blocking of the websites is quite efficient. It's efficient in the way of attracting the new audiences because we, for example, our website lost around 60% of the audience, monthly audience. And they were the people we attracted every month, like from, for example, Google search. And if you are blocked, so just algorithms that have no emotions just decrease your rate in the search engines. You don't receive the sudden audience that you haven't seen before. So, and you can't implement this audience into the funnel, and you can't convert this audience into the loyal readers after. So you're always walking inside the bubble, and it's a big problem for all the media in the industry. And it's the reason why, for example, we started to experiment with partisan channels of distributions like, I don't know, Pinterest and Google Documents. For example, when there was military drafting started in Russia, we made the Google Doc that can't be blocked technically with all the relevant information about leaving country and avoiding mobilization. And so, of course, it's not about the solution for all the situation, but this never-ending fight with censorship will be going on. But of course, I don't think so. I'm quite pessimistic about that. I don't think there is the solution for avoiding censorship and being the same scale as it was before. So it's the sad truth that we are always trying to go through bubbles now.
I think thanks for raising sort of this topic of kind of partisan channels. I think it's something that, you know, it's quite interesting for those who aren't as aware. There's been a lot of, I think, creative ways, both in Russia and, by the way, in Belarus, actually, of distributing information. You know, Tinder actually works really well. Turns out that when you put attractive photos of both male and female located in a specific town, and then when you start chatting with them, it turns out that they have some pretty clear messages about what's going on in your country. That's, you know, there's been some creativity there, you know, sharing through closed groups as well. You know, is this something where collaboration can be a way to amplify these creative solutions? Penelope, is that something that you see as potentially one of these shared service centers that, you know, like looking at the data and sharing this kind of innovation to help media bypass the digital Iron Curtain?
Well, I think it's a trial and error at the beginning, and I think all the media tries, and I'm not so sure if you can share those best cases because they're often connected to the kind of content that you produce. Like you said, there are very innovative ways to put that on cooking sites, you know, and stuff like that. So if you investigative report, you probably don't put it on cooking sites. So, you know, I think you have to find ways related to your content, and yeah. But I'm probably not the right person. I think this has to be solved by the media and not...
Yes. Okay. Well, okay, I don't want to put, you know, I've pushed, I think it's a challenging question to answer, and I think one that will, continue, right? Like it's something that, you know, it's a lot of experimentation is needed, not to, and to continue to, you know, not give up and try to find ways to solve these issues. Okay, I'm just looking at the time. I think we have time for a couple of questions. If not, I will use my privileges as moderator to continue to grill our panelists. Yes. Okay.
Do you want to go with the question? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We'll go next. I think we'll match. Yeah. Hi.
Hey. I'm Luke Johnson. I'm a Berlin-based journalist. I've covered Russia and Eastern Europe for a while. My question is, you've been talking a lot about the distribution. Can you talk, to the extent that you're able, about this sort of news gathering side? And I'm particularly interested in, you know, if since the wartime censorship and, you know, some news outlets have been declared foreign agents and undesirable organizations, you know, that those might not mean much operating outside the country, but for the risks of people talking to your organizations and like, you know, what effect has that had, you know, since the war and you know, maybe even in the past, you know, 3 to 6 months, you know, as censorship has tightened inside the country? Thanks.
You want to answer?
Okay, you?
Well, it definitely affects us because some people don't want to talk to an organization that is like foreign agent or undesirable organization, and we lose some speakers because of that. That's the biggest part of it. And you can continue.
We have a funny situation that we are blocked in Russia, of course, but we are not the foreign agent yet. But everyone thinks that we are, and I don't think that something will change when we will be the foreign agent, because when now we address, like, for different reasons to some people, with the questions, with the requests. They told us, oh, even if you are foreign agent, I will talk to you. And we say, we are not foreign agents. Doesn't matter. So you are a forbidden organization. Okay, nice. Of course, it's a problem. Yep, but it can be. So it's just an obstacle, and it's another obstacle that we all have. So all the, every meeting about Russian media exile is a talk about visa problems, relocation problems, opening bank account problems, and all these problems are just problems. They can be solved. So you just keep trying and you solve this problem, like the problems with the sources. So it's just a hard work. I perceive it like that.
We had a...
Yeah, I'm not into the business, so probably a trivial question. Because, well, I'm still the person that going to the actual website, so it was very useful, and thanks for all the information you provided. I'm more interested in the production of the information, actually. So, because you mentioned, and I think that's a big, thing, being abroad and relying on local journalists, which are risking their life, right? So how this relocation, which is not relocation as you mentioned correctly, immigration affected the actual production of the information. And in terms of, I guess, reliability and validity as well, because my sense is that journalism should be, in a way, on the ground, have a pulse, as you already mentioned, on the situation in the country. And I understand that technology helps to preserve that relations, but if you could potentially expand a bit on that. Which is probably not a question, so...
Yeah, it's a mess, of course. Of course, all the fact-checking process became problematic. All the process with all the risks on the freelancers are huge, and we had lots of discussions inside our sector about how to deal with the situation. That we pay these people money for their work. They are inside country for some reasons because of the ideology or because they can't leave or they don't want to leave, but. They can have problems anytime, and it's a big exaggeration to say that it's their responsibility. No, it's shared responsibility. And every editor-in-chief, I'm not an editor-in-chief, there's our editor-in-chief if you want to ask about content more, but every media manager is scared of the situation when his or her journalists are in prison because of the work for your media outlet. Because no news article is not worth the 10 years prison term.
I think we've seen it with the Wall Street Journal's recent case.
Yeah.
Just what that looks like, right? Sorry, yeah, but we do need the microphone. I think 1 and then 2, and then we will close. 2 minutes, yeah, so.
Hi, okay,
yeah.
and
Thank you.
Thanks. Maria Michela D'Alessandro, I'm an Italian journalist, but I studied and worked in Russia. So yesterday there were here in Perugia the guys from the Kiev Independent, and I think that it's completely different on one end, but at the same time kind of similar, but inside Ukraine and for you outside Russia. So I would like to know how would be journalism in Russia, but also in terms of topics after the war. Because, I mean, we will all hope that this war will end sometime, somehow. And if you will go back to Russia and the audience, the readership, how will change?
I think it's hard to talk about that, but I definitely know that most of my colleagues want to come back to Russia after the war ends, after they will be able to go back to Russia, and we'll go back and see what's going on there and what people are interested in, because we don't know how it will end, we don't know what will happen, so we don't know what audience will be interested in. So it's hard to speculate on that, but we'll definitely try to come back and try to keep working inside of Russia.
One more question, and then I think we'll be closing down.
Thank you. My name is Tamita Pressel. I work for a Swiss news outlet, NZZ. I think when the war started over a year ago, a lot of Western journalists or observers were hoping that Russians would do something to stop it. And then it became clear, talking to people who knew Russia, that actually the Russian public, a lot of them didn't seem to care so much outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg. And I was wondering if you could speak to more than a year later now, what's the public perception in Russia? Have people started caring? Does it affect their daily lives?
That's a tough question in 30 seconds, but that's what we have.
I think a lot of Russians are affected by propaganda deeply. They listen to propaganda for 10 years or even more. So a lot of them actually believe that Russians are killing Nazis in Ukraine and Russia is doing a good thing, and which is very sad, but it's the truth. And many of Russians outside of Russia, outside of St. Petersburg and Moscow, are just poor and they don't have time to care about anything else other than trying to survive and stuff. That's what I think. What do you think?
I have a very short answer. Some countries stated that Russia is a terrorist state, and this terrorism and this terror is not just about Ukraine. Of course, the most significant terror is in Ukraine, but there is also about the situation inside country, and it's very efficient because everyone is reading news, even in our independent outlets, and everyone sees that there are prison terms for nothing for lots of years, and no one wants to be the next. That's the answer.
Okay, on that note, not so optimistic, but it is what it is. We will end a story that is continuing to develop, a piece of work that will be continued. Thank you so much to Penelope, Kirill, Jana for joining us today, and for everybody here. Thank you.